answering questions as they come in on the 3x5 note cards, and then we post all the answers online because some of the questions are absolutely outstanding. So we want to continue that list of answering the questions as they come in. Our land acknowledgement, we acknowledge the original inhabitants of this area, the Snohomish people and their successors, the Toledo tribes. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, gathered, and taken care of these lands. We respect their sovereignty and their right to self-determination and honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. We will strive to be honest about our past mistakes and bring about a future that includes their people, stories, and voices to form a more just and equitable society. So, how did we get here? Why are we here? Because right now, Marysville is at a pivotal time in its history. So when I arrived in Marysville, I inherited, of course, a team of leaders, and I also inherited this circumstance where we had failed a levy twice. And when our former finance director, when our former finance director explained the situation, what he explained was, if we pass the levy, things will be tight, but we should be able to make it through. So that was from our former finance director. So of course, that is what we communicated to the public. And that is what we communicated in our levy campaign. Because that was the best information we had at that time. The levy passed and our finance director left the district. So there's no way that the director of finance position can go unfilled. Because we have to pay bills, we have to do all those things, we have to process payroll. So that's one of those vital positions that cannot go unfilled. So the first thing that happened was I wanted to try to find the best person I could find. So I went to a search firm, and out of a favor to me, they did everything for free. They agreed to do everything for free, which is unheard of. But I explained our situation, how we wouldn't receive any levy money, and they graciously said yes. So the search firm said, Zach, you're not gonna find anyone to stop working where they are in March and come over to your school district. It's not gonna work. So it is better if you wait, and you need to find someone to come in temporarily, which made sense because asking folks to pick up their lives when most people are in the throes of their school year, it's unlikely. So we went out and we found consultants. So we paid for one person, but two came. It was a husband and wife team. So they took over the job of finance director, supervised all the people. And then one day they came in and said, Zach, you have a problem. Because they took a deep dive into our finances. That's what they do. They looked at everything. That's what people contracted these folks all over the country. And we were fortunate to be able to get them to come work with us. So they took a deep dive into everything, and they came to me and said, you have a problem. Your levy is not going to be enough to cover all of your obligations. And on top of that, there's a risk that we won't make payroll here in this school district because the cash flow problem is so severe. So that was not the information that any of us wanted to hear. So after we found out, we notified, this was March. So after we found out, we notified OSPI and the Education Service District 189. The thing that was amazing to me was with all the people who are involved in our finances, the state auditor, ESD, OSPI, nobody saw this coming, which was amazing to me. Like, how does that happen? You know, we have state auditors and we had nothing but clean audits for years, nothing significant. No one caught this. So then we notified everyone and said, listen, we need help. So then we froze non-essential positions. We rolled back budgets. We just started to tighten our belts. We did all sorts of things just to save money. People retired, we didn't fill those positions because we had to do everything we can, because I understand that this is something that I personally walked into, but it was my problem to solve now. So we weren't gonna have a situation where folks were not going to get paid. So we had to do something. So we started this process of rolling back expenses. We tightened our belts so tight that initially we took out a loan. We borrowed from our capital account because we believed at that time, or with the information at that time, if we didn't borrow from our capital account, we risked folks not getting paid. So we tightened our belts so much that we didn't have to use that loan. This is a different situation now because we actually had to go back out and borrow from that capital account. So we have been pursuing options to solve this challenge since March. We notified our employee groups to say, listen, this is a really bad situation. And it's so bad that it's hard to fathom how on earth does a school district get to a point where they're at risk of not meeting payroll when initially we thought we would be okay if we passed the levy. Then we found out that wasn't the case. So never in our history, never in our state's history, has a school district our size had these kind of challenges. And it stemmed from not passing that levy those 2 times, because it created a $25 million hole in the budget. And when the levy comes, we're not receiving $25 million. That makes everything very, very difficult. So right now, we hired another finance director, Dr. Gonzalez, and she confirmed that what the consultants found was correct. We have a very, very dire problem. So we've been, all those cost-saving measures we had, now we still have to do the things to help kids learn. That's the thing that we have to keep in mind. We still have to support teachers, we still have to provide materials, we still have to provide professional development and support for principals. We can't stop doing those things. Our first duty is to teach kids. But it gets so much more difficult when our financial situation is so dire. And again, how do all these people who were involved with our finances, and no one saw this coming until I brought in some consultants? It's just hard to get your mind around. So if there was ever a time where we need to work together, it is now. So one of the things people told me about was in the history of Marysville is that we hit some very difficult financial times in the 70s, that things got really, really difficult. From what I understand about that time, it's like that again, because this $25 million hole is formidable. So of course, we've been going to all these different options. We've gone to the county treasurer, we've gone to banks, we've looked into things like tax anticipation notes, which school districts, it is not uncommon for a school district to borrow whenever there is a cash flow problem. That is not uncommon. What's difficult in this situation is every single time we tried, the doors closed. And that's where we are now. So very, very soon, and we're going to talk about this, very, very soon, we have folks from the Education Service District. And they're going to come in because I got off the phone with the superintendent of public instruction, and he said, you all need to cut $1 million a month from your budget, which I believe is a very, very large amount, especially since there have been so many cuts already. So right now, what I want to do is get into more of the details. There's going to be a lot of numbers in this presentation. So, but just know, just get your minds right for that. There are going to be a whole bunch of numbers in this presentation, but Dr. Gonzalez is going to break everything down. Dr. Gonzalez.
Thank you all for being here this evening. A couple of housekeeping notes. In the event of an emergency, you can go out this door here, you can go out that door down there. There are note cards that are out here. We're asking that if you would like a response, please go ahead and put your name, phone number, and email address on the back of the cards. We're asking that you leave them up here. This presentation will be available tomorrow on our district website on the budget page so that you can all go back and refer to it. But let's talk a little more about who has validated our financial situation. Every single one of these organizations has validated what it is that we're going to be sharing this evening. So the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, we probably have 2 to 3 conversations and meetings with them every single week. As a matter of fact, they will be here in the district on Thursday. The State of Washington and the Auditor's Office. The Snohomish County Treasurer. As a matter of fact, they know exactly how much cash we have every day to the penny because it sits in their accounts. And finally, and we like a lot of acronyms in public education, but we call it the ESD, but it's our Educational Service District. And so they have a number of districts that they oversee. Coincidentally, all 3 of the districts that I'm going to share tonight that are in binding conditions are all here within our ESD. But every single one of these organizations has gone through our finances, they've gone through our books, they have looked at everything. So let's talk a little bit about binding conditions. Binding conditions is a point where the state comes in and they say, we know that you're not going to be able to make payroll in your current year. So it's not a caution. It is going from we're okay to we're absolutely not okay. And there are 2 other districts that are joining us, LaConner and Mount Baker. Here's the concerning thing. There are 20 other districts at least right now that we are hearing are on the bubble as of right now. Here's my concern when I asked the question about a month ago. When were we on your radar? The answer was not until March. And I said, then how many more Marysville school districts are there in this state that you don't know about? And so I'm going to talk a little about that, but more importantly, I'm going to talk about what got us here. And I'm going to share all the numbers and you can see the presentation online as well. So we're going to talk about what got us here, cover a little bit about that, the state of our finances, what we've done, what we need to do, and next steps. And those next steps are ever evolving. So let's talk about what got us here. It started with a double levy failure. What is a double levy failure? It is 2 levies that are put on the ballot in 1 calendar year, and they both were not able to be passed. It was in spring 2022, February and April. And once you put 2 on the ballot in a given year, you cannot put it on a 3rd time. So we had to wait until February 2023 in order to put one on the ballot. So what that means is we went an entire year without that funding. So let's see what that looks like. This is from budget adoption in August. So what I'm trying to do with a lot of these presentations is keep the slides consistent. Because if I don't keep them consistent, then people say, well, you changed the numbers. Well, as you know in your checkbooks, every single day the numbers are likely changing. That's because we have somebody coming into the district, we have somebody leaving the district, we have new invoices that have come in, we have new bills that have been paid. And so what I'm doing for consistency is I'm going back to what we did in August, and this is what was presented to the board. And the importance of this slide shows, first of all, our enrollment and what we were projecting for enrollment. It shows our beginning fund balance. So our beginning fund balance is approximately the amount of cash that we have as we start the school year. And of course, this is done in August, but we don't close our books until the end of August, and they're not completely done until October, like balancing your checkbook and doing your taxes. So you can see the revenue that we are expecting over the next few years. And then you can see our expenditures, and our expenditures aren't changing. Why are they not changing? Because we don't know what that's going to look like. So assuming that our enrollment was at the top and the amount of money that we get per student, assuming that our expenditures didn't change and the cost of absolutely nothing went up, which we know isn't practical, we would be negative in at least these 3 years. So I want you to keep looking at that slide because I'm gonna come back to that. But let's talk for a second about a double levy failure. The levy in 2018-19, you can see it brought in $23.8 million. Yay, community. This was absolutely funding that we needed in all of our schools and all of our programs. The next year, it was about 20.9, so roughly $21 million. 26, 27, and then look at what happens. The community was loud and clear. They were not happy with the school district. The levy doesn't pass, and the money that we expected to come in from the levy that we put on the ballot didn't come in. So when you look at those numbers, what you see that if we had passed the levy, it would have been $13.7 million that came in April and May of this last year, which was the last fiscal year. But it also has an impact on this fiscal year because that $11.2 million right there did not come in the fall. When you take those amounts and you add them up, it adds up to $25 million. So in essence, when those two didn't pass, to lay off $21 million worth of people in this district. So I'm going to go back to this slide because all I'm going to do in my next slide is I'm just going to take this and I'm going to push it all the way up to the top. So see the same ending fund balance that we had before. And by the way, the school board has a policy. The policy is that we have an 8% reserve, an 8% savings, if you will. And we're nowhere close to that. And if our expenditures stayed exactly the same for the next 3 years, we would finally have something left in savings. So that ending line right there, you see ending fund balance, I'm pushing it all the way to the top. Now I'm going to show you what it would look like if that levy had passed either time. There's the $25 million that we said we didn't get. When you add that $25 million, and just for the sake of ease, I'm just putting it all in 23, 24. This is what happens to the ending fund balance. We wouldn't be in the position we are in currently if those levies had passed. What else got us here? Very clear declining enrollment. As a matter of fact, we have even more declining enrollment this year. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Here are the numbers that we pulled from the state. And what you can see is the enrollment changes. And we're just including basic education plus alternative learning. So there are other programs, they don't bring in the same exact amount per student. So for the sake of ease, all we're doing is counting these two. So you can see a big drop in 1920. 1920 to 2021 of almost 400 students. What happened? COVID. And what happened during COVID? We expected that all of the students were going to come back. Across the nation, we expected that, except that wasn't the reality. So we all budgeted and we all staffed for them all coming back, and they didn't come back. And then they stayed gone for a number of reasons. Many of our states are very expensive to live in. And COVID hit a lot of families in a very difficult way. And so they moved to other locations, or they pulled their students out and they homeschooled. Homeschooling numbers went up very high. So I want you to take a look right here. What we had estimated for this year was 9,530 students, except we have about 300 less. So let's see what happens with the numbers. It's a decline of about 332 full-time students. So let's do this. We're going to assume that every student who comes into the district results in us receiving about $10,000 per student. That's just basic programs. It's not special education. It's not language programs. It's not high cap. So when we did that, when we had that big drop in 2021, that was about a $3 million amount of student revenue that we didn't get in. The next year, okay, some of them came back. And so our budget increased about 546,000. But look at what happens in the subsequent years. What we had anticipated for this year was that we were going to have 30 to 40 students fewer. We didn't. We had over 300. So this further compounded our challenges this year. Because when parents say that they're sending their kids to school, we expect that most of them are going to come. And so now we're going to start working with demographers to get a better idea as to where we think we are going to be next year. Because being 2 million, close to $3 million off is really difficult. And we were just going based on the scientific methods of how you calculate enrollment. What else? Staffing above what the state gives us money for. That would be the prototypical model. Many of you know this as McCleary. So the prototypical model and or McCleary, depending on what you want to call it, what it does is it calculates the number of staff members that you should have based on the number of students you have. Plain and simple. And they break it down into a bunch of different categories. And so I'm going to try to make this a little simpler to explain. The challenge with the prototypical model is that it just pays the base salary and benefits. What it doesn't cover is it doesn't cover master's degree stipends. It doesn't cover stipends for any of our other staff members. It doesn't include extra hours, extra duty, other assignments, overtime, extra time, you name it, class overloads. Last year, we assumed the class overloads based on the history before was going to be about $500,000. It ended up being 1.4 million. So all these things come into play. The prototypical model does not give you money beyond what the state says you should have in staffing. So then you might be asking, well, why in the world do you staff above the prototypical model? There's lots of reasons. We have a lot of values and priorities in this community. There are a lot of things that we want for students. So they don't come in nice little neat groups of 23 or 25 or 27. Our community wants to support the whole child. The arts are important. Athletics are important. CTE is important. Electives are important. Counseling programs are important. Let's talk about COVID for a second, because I don't think there was anybody in this room right now that would say that kids coming to school these days are the same types of kids with the same challenges that they had prior to COVID. Do you think they're the same? So the biggest challenge we have is that the need for counseling has increased, the need for more support, the need for more supervision, all of that has increased. We like smaller class sizes. So that's been important. But the key is that when we have needs for students, we've always met those needs. And then we have students with special abilities. And for anyone who follows special education and special education funding, there are requirements that we have to provide specific types of programs for students, and the state and the federal government combined do not cover all of those expenses. That's what impacts the prototypical model. So I'm going to show this slide. Some of you have seen this before. I don't have all the categories up here because I probably need 3 slides to do it. So I'm just going to focus on 3 different types of positions. I'm going to focus on teachers, counselors and guidance programs. There's a bunch of different positions that go into that category, and principals. And what the state says is based on the number of students, and we're looking at last year, much easier to use last year's numbers to paint this picture. The state said we should have 444.89 teachers. Our staffing, we had 460.98. And you see something similar with counseling and other supports. and liaisons, and you see the same thing here for principals, right? So we have more staffing than what the state gives us funding for. So what we're going to do with this now is we're going to take those numbers from the last slide, and I just took the main two that everybody can usually relate to. For every teacher of the 444 that the state said we were able to have, we received $88,000, roughly $89,000. And for principals, with what it said, we would receive $132,000. Except this is what it really cost us when you look at the number of positions that we have. And so when you play that all the way out, you can see that just in these two types of positions, we had $15 million more in payroll for staffing than what the state gives us funding for. So that's the challenge with the prototypical model. The state would provide 43 million and we spend 58. Passing on the full IPD. We call this the cost of living adjustment. Let's just go back to those same positions that we talked about before. And again, this is not the entire picture, it's just a slice of it. So last year, we received a 5.5% cost of living adjustment. But the state provides it to the amount of money that it gives us for those positions. Except over here, what you see is that because we have more positions and we pay higher, that amount increases. So just in these positions, we're now spending $16 million a year more than the state is giving us. There's a lot of numbers on this page, but I'm going to break this page down in just 1 second in 2 slides. But if anybody looks at this presentation, all they're going to see is that this slide and the next slides that I'm going to show you are zoom in versions of this. This is what we presented to the school board this is the most current finances as of October. This is our cash flow. So this is the amount of money that we expect to have at the end of every single one of these months. So you see a lot of red. So let's look at how we zoom in. This is our cash flow, September, October, November, December, January, February, with no borrowing. And I'll get to borrowing in just a second. So the month that we were going to have a problem, the very first time is this month, right now, November payroll. And then you can see that it increases month by month. And if I play out the rest of the months, you see that the highest or largest shortfall we have is in the month of June at $15.8 million, roughly $16 million. And then it gets a little better in the subsequent months. So this is what we did. At the last school board meeting, we knew that we had to make payroll, right? Because our commitment is that we're going to make sure that our employees get paid. And our employees will continue to get paid. So what we did was, you see that $5 million right there in the yellow? We borrowed $5 million out of an $8.2 million capital fund. So our capital fund is for major building projects. And we're able to borrow money provided we pay it back 364 days after we borrow it. That's the rule, 1 year minus 1 day. Leap year kind of throws it off, and we got a leap year, so we should get 1 more day. And so what it does, we already borrowed this money. So we took this to the school board, they approved it, we borrowed the money, and so we're good until January, which is better than November. So here's what happens with that capital loan, and I just played it out for the rest of the year. You can see that the lowest month is now $10.8 million. And again, the treasurer has looked at all of these, the state has looked at all of these, Educational Service District, the ESD has looked at all of these. They're watching all of this very carefully, and they're double and triple checking our numbers. As a matter of fact, they've also sent in another consultant to see if there are any other positions that we're not thinking of that we can go ahead and take a look at. They're taking a look at all of our spending to figure out if there are any things, because we said, bring more people in. We want another set of eyes. We will welcome anybody that wants to come in and help us with this situation. So here's what we've done so far. Over the last 2 years, we have reduced 132.2 full-time equivalents. So for a lot of positions, including a lot of our paraprofessionals, there were people that lost 2, 3, 4 hours. So this does not equate to 132.2 people. But it does tell us that about 10.9% of our staff time has been reduced in the last 2 years. That's pretty notable. We've reduced services to students, supervision, student support. We've increased, and this is an impact. Because when you don't have someone in a position, and it's a position that is required to get work done, like payroll, like human resources, and trying to hire individuals, sometimes there's increased overtime and extra time. We're seeing that in transportation. We're seeing that in food and nutrition with some of our position shortages. We have staff that aren't able to respond as quickly as before. And one of the challenges is when people drive by our schools, the lights are on. And kids are running around. And it looks like everything's okay. But that's not necessarily the case. So recently we've identified at least 5 positions that were eliminated that were essential, crucial positions that have to do with funding and money coming into the district. That if we don't have somebody doing that work and reports are wrong, we lose millions and millions and millions of dollars. And so we're bringing some of those positions back because they were so essential that when people retired and we said, oh, we're just not going to fill that, it wasn't a very smart decision because it directly impacts the money coming into this district. The second thing we did, we went to the treasurer. So there are 3 of us that went to the treasurer's office. We sat across from the treasurer and his entire team. And we said, we're coming to you because we would like a loan. And they said, when they took it to their finance committee, they declined the request for the loan because they said it didn't meet their standards for safety, liquidity, and return on investment. They basically said no. We were then told, well, go ahead and have your board pass a resolution. And what you're going to do is you're going to ask for an emergency apportionment advance. What does that mean? It means that we're getting money ahead of time that we were waiting for, that we were supposed to get in April, May, and June. And they said, go ahead and pass a resolution. They told us the amount. This is how much you can get in emergency apportionment. Okay, took it to our board. And then on the lovely holiday that I'm sure many of you were enjoying a couple of weeks ago, we spent an hour on the phone and on Zoom being told that they said all it was going to do was buy us a few months and that our problem is bigger in April and May, and they declined the request. Totally agree. I agree. So the next thing we did was we passed a levy in February 2023 for enrichment programs and services. But the levy amount was lower than what was needed. So there's this levy amount. What they do is they take a look at the cost of living adjustments and they take a look at the borrowing that's in your community. And when we passed that levy, we left $6 million on the table. So in essence, what happened, and I agree with the strategy because we've done it before in other school districts, but if you're asking for this much and the community says no, and then you ask for the same amount again and the community says no, what do? You go back and ask for a little less and hope that you get something because something's better than nothing. The challenge is for us that it left $6 million on the table. But here's the piece that I'm going to show you in just a second, which is the levy funds are not just going to miraculously appear and all of a sudden solve all the problems. The reason for that is because they've already been calculated into the next 4 years of our school district budget. So you remember this slide, same slide, just bringing it back again so you can see it again. This is exactly what our cash flow looked like end of October. And so what is happening is when you zoom in, you can see that the levy money was already included. So we've already factored that levy money in. So every single time we've showed you any of these slides, the levy money is already included. So it's not as if there's the, you know, the solution that's going to come in April. Here's what else we did. And Dr. Robbins mentioned this, we borrowed from our capital fund. We did that back in June. We borrowed $6 million based on, at that point in time, what we thought we were going to need to get us through into the beginning of the next school year. And the reductions that were taking place and the positions that were frozen for the end of the year were so successful that it turned out that we were able to pay that back fairly quickly, because we decided, well, let's go ahead and pay it back. Because every time we borrow from ourselves, we always also have to pay the interest. So let's go ahead, let's take the interest off the table, let's get the money back, because we can get a little further into the school year. And so we were able to pay it back, but it was about a $30,000 interest payment for a little more than a month of borrowing that money. So you start to see how this adds up. I'd also like to share staffing over the last 5 years. So we have different bargaining groups that are here. So we have service center leaders, we have teachers, we have non-representative exempt employees, secretarial, that's our PSC union. We have SEIU, we've got 10-month and 12-month, they're two different groups. And then we have our certificated administrators, so that would be our principals, our assistant directors, our assistant principals. I think that about covers them. And so if you look from year to year, what you're able to see here is you're able to see the number of positions that we've reduced since the 21-22 school year. So here's what we did on the far side. We actually put in the percent of positions that have gone away. And so in that point in time, the service center leaders, 17% of the positions were eliminated, 11% of the teachers, 11, close to 12% if you round it. And then you can see the other groups as well. The biggest reduction was here with SEIU 12. And those were a lot of our paraprofessional positions and a handful of others where we were reducing hours for multiple groups of employees. And I want to note, because this is important to understand, there is one group that went up. The group that went up includes all of those that are located here on the bottom. So our liaisons, motor pool drivers, transportation specialists, and a lot that work in the transportation department, student support advocates, CTE staff, and those are grant funded. A lot of these are grant funded, and service center staff in human resources, finance, technology, and communications. So again, you saw these numbers before, and I'm just breaking them down a little more, but you can see the total reductions, 132.22 full-time equivalents, and approximately 10.9% of our staff. So I'm going to move on here to central office administrators. And what I did was I pulled the districts that are most similar to our school district based on enrollment. And this enrollment is defined by the state, and it's off of the state website for last year. And so what they do is they break down the total enrollment, the way that they're counting it. And then they include the number of schools. And so I know there's been some question about the fact that this shows 23 and we have 22, and that's because that's what the state has. And so I didn't want to manipulate any of our data because I also didn't have the ability to manipulate any other school district's data. And so what you see in the blue part at the very top is these are typically bands of positions and salaries that are equivalent to those. And so okay, if you want to pass out some more cards, that would be great. Okay, so with the central office administrators, okay.
But that's how they're doing it, so let the woman speak.
All right, so you know what, we're not going to answer questions, but you know what, I understand. I understand that people are upset here. And no. Okay, I understand that people are upset because this is a very upsetting situation. And there are many of us who have come to this district to try to help with this situation. So what I want to continue, ma'am, we're not taking questions tonight. Thank you. So I'm going to continue with central office administrators. So what we're showing in all of these slides
Ladies and gentlemen, if it's okay, what we would like to do is continue to share the budget presentation. Afterwards, I will hang around and answer questions the best that I can. But right now, if we can please just allow Dr. Gonzalez to continue, please, and thank you so much.
So with central office administrators, what I did was I pulled up and our team worked on all of the central office administrators in all of the districts to get a good idea as to how many there were and how we were measuring up to other school districts. So these are the central office administrators that we have in our school district. And we don't have any chief and deputy roles, unlike many of our neighboring school districts. And we also have 3 positions that we technically don't even include as management. I'm keeping them as part of this chart because in our district, we have these positions and I don't know in other districts whether they are management or not. So when you take a look at the central office administrators in all of the comparable districts, what you'll see is that we have fewer than others do. So what's happened in other districts? There's 2 other districts that I think are material to really be talking about tonight. The first one is the Vader School District. So Vader School District, a little more than 800 students, and this took place back in 2007. And the Vader School District became fiscally insolvent. So they had 2 years of failed levies and bonds. And so what we did when we were talking with the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction was we wanted to know what other districts had gone through this. And we wanted to know what the outcome was. Because we were curious to see what the next steps could possibly be. And so in that district, the district was dissolved and they were absorbed by a neighboring school district. And that would be the Castle Rock School District. The students in that district are now bused 15 miles to another school district. The town lost its school, the community became very divided, and then in 2008, we found this yesterday online, wrecking balls came and they demolished the school, which was really surprising. Another school district, Shoreline School District, they entered into binding conditions in 2008. It resulted in significant staff reductions, especially with the classified staff. So that was a lot of the support staff across the district were impacted by that. They ended up with larger class sizes. They did away with a lot of their professional learning days. And then they came out of binding conditions. And this is where we're going to be working with some of their staff to try to figure out how we can come out on the other side as a better, stronger, more effective school district. But they came out of binding conditions with much stronger academic programs, clear communication with the community, and future successful levy and bond campaigns. They are one of those districts, though, that recently, if you've read anything in the news, they are looking at about $14 million worth of reductions as well. Right, so this is a bigger issue that is happening across our state. So some of the reductions that we have taken so far, we've reduced about 10% of our non-employee budgets. Now, our non-employee budgets aren't as big as we'd like them to be. As a matter of fact, over 80% of our costs in our district are human resource costs. We've reduced staff hours. We had purchase cards that made it really easy for many of our staff at school sites to be able to make purchases, and we pulled all of those back because we found out that that was a way where, you know, if you use your credit card, you don't necessarily get the statement right away. You don't have to pay it right away. And so there were delays in that we felt were making it difficult for sites and departments to be able to manage their budgets. We now have a confirmation process that's part of all of our requisitions. So we have 3 of us that are checking every single request that comes in for a purchase order to make sure that the funds are there. We have special routing for anything that has to do with grants and technology. We've passed on convenience fees for credit cards. If anybody's using those, you'll know that there's a charge for those now. We're only allowing essential and grant-funded travel. So there are some departments, particularly CTE, Career Technical Education, and they get specific grant funding. And part of their grant funding is to go to professional development. And if you don't spend all that money, you lose that money, and then the next year you're given less. So that's why you'll see some people with CTE that are traveling on a regular basis. But we are looking at their hotel stays and we are looking at meals because we want to make sure that we can stretch those dollars as much as possible. We have no building carryover from last year into this year. We're going to be moving into reducing budgets fairly quickly now as well. If you've been to any of our board meetings, we've taken a look at our facility use and we've increased those fees as well. We have indirect, so any money that now comes into the district that's part of a grant program, we make sure that we're taking what's called an indirect fee, and there's a state amount for indirect fees. There's a state and a federal one. We've eliminated middle school and C-teens district-wide, although we're very fortunate to have some wonderful partners who have stepped in and with community fundraising have been able to bring those back. We're double checking all of our late fees, but here's where the rubber hits the road. We have to have a new revenue stream to cover the expenses that we have and the cash shortfalls. The Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction has set us a goal of reducing $1 million a month. That should be helping according to what they've shared. We're finding it extremely difficult to do that. And so that's why the consultant that's going to come in is going to be helping with that. We need to find a loan that's going to give us the lowest interest rate that we can come up with. Because the higher the interest rate, the more interest that we're paying every year, that makes it harder for us to continue those reductions. And we have to come up with a payback plan. So let me give you an example. Before I said $10.8 million approximately that we were short after we borrow from ourselves, which by the way, we have to pay back. So I've rounded it up to 11 million just to make it easy. Right now, the county treasurer is letting us know that it's about a 6.8% interest rate if we borrowed from them. So in year 1 alone, it would be $748,000 that we have to pay in interest. Compared to a private bank, and we've been vetting this idea with private banks, there have only been 1 or 2 out of about 7 that we've contacted that are even interested in having the conversation, and the interest rate would be about 9%. So you can start seeing exactly what that cost is. There are 5 steps that are really important for districts that have to go through budget reductions. Cuts, but cuts are never going to solve all of the problems. Funding shifts. We've got to make sure that we keep the lights on and we make sure that we're paying payroll. We need to look at all of our restricted funds. So these are the funds that come in and they're earmarked for something, right? They can only be for certain positions and certain types of programs. And what we have to do is make sure that we're maximizing that, because if we can push as much as legitimate into grant programs, it allows us some flexibility on the general fund side. We need to come up with investments. What does that mean? We need to find more ways to bring students into our district and keep them in our district. And then finally, advocacy. And advocacy is probably one of the most important pieces, because from everything we've shared tonight, it's the entire organizational structure, everybody working on legislation to say the funding model doesn't work. The funding model doesn't work, and the amount of money that goes into that funding doesn't work. And we've painted that picture tonight. So here are some next steps. First of all, we borrowed $5 million from the capital fund. We already took care of that. We have to pay that back by late November of next year. We have to find the reductions of about $1 million each month. And the consultants actually started working with us this week. We're going to be working with our bargaining groups for concessions, and this means all employees in the entire school district that we're going to be talking to. We're gonna begin community conversations around some of the ideas that we're gonna share on the next slides on what is on the table. And then finally, the idea of learning from our neighbors who have been through this is going to be really, really important. What did you do that are best practices that got you out of binding conditions that we can also do? So I want to start these next few slides, and I'm gonna.
So when the holiday came, what was that? What was that Friday? Veterans Day. So on Veterans Day, the superintendent of public instruction said, Zach, we need to meet with you. My team wants to meet with you and your finance team. And they started to make recommendations. And those recommendations were just rough. So what folks started talking about was the whole notion of consolidated schools, closing schools, increasing class sizes, close down the pool, freezing all departments and programs. So I'm looking at this thing going, well, wait a minute. Some of these things are essential to the identity of our community and the functioning of our district. The folks who are coming to have these conversations, they don't care. We care, they don't. Because when they said, you need to shed $1 million a month, my first response was, from where? There's nothing else to cut. I mean, we can keep cutting, the next thing you know, kids aren't getting what they need, bills don't get paid, people start filing frivolous lawsuits because we have no one to defend us. Outside counsel charges $650 an hour. This is the kind of stuff that's happening. So these recommendations, all of this on the table right now, this is what they're recommending to me that we do. Now, right now, I have a choice. We have a choice. It's not even me. The board has a choice ultimately. The thing that I'm going to be I am concerned that the recommendations, because when things get rough, people start using their influence. And right now, I get worried about some of these recommendations, the rough ones becoming realities. And I'm not going to have anything to say about it. The board will receive it, the board being pretty much pushed to make some of these really, really hard reductions. Because I'm going to tell you, if we can't come up with a payback plan, if we can't figure out where these revenue sources are coming from, things will become very uncomfortable, more uncomfortable than they are now. So all of these things they're recommending, I mean, freeze purchases of curriculum. I mean, we already have an issue where we have kids who need curriculum. One of the expenditures, like I said earlier, we can't stop doing the things to help kids learn. So teachers made a recommendation to me that the elementary schools didn't have enough books. I said, that's not something we can put off. I mean, how are we going to raise? We already are having achievement issues, so we're gonna raise achievement with nothing to teach from? That makes no sense. So there are certain expenditures we just have to make because it's the right thing to do. They want to love all of these recommendations, eliminating librarians. Our library science employees contribute. They're important. Eliminate deans and assistant principals, shop program, move the service center. I'm like, if there's space, I'll come stay there. Freeze all enrichment programs and field trips paid by district funds. I mean, so our kids not to have, now I understand these are recommendations that folks are making to us, and the reality is they're telling me, Zach, you have to cut $1 million a month. So I understand why some of these recommendations are really, really hard to stomach. So right now, there are things that I know I absolutely don't want to be in a situation where we have to cut. I don't want to do that. But the reality is, and these people are coming in telling us, if you don't find them, things make it difficult. And when I say use influence, so right now what I've done is I've met with every single one of our legislators that have impact on what happens with us. They know the situation that we are in. So if folks ask, well, what can I do? You can reach out to your legislators and explain the situation. They know, but there's something about telling the stories of the things that happen with our children. Tell your legislators about the field trips. Tell your legislators how important that the sports programs are. Tell your legislators how your kid may need materials and they don't have them. Tell your legislators about wanting to send your kid to after-school tutoring and being worried about not being able to do that. Because right now, it is so important that these people, because in our legislators, they are responsive. They are concerned. They're not turning a blind eye. But the decisions that happen in the legislature, they're being made, quite frankly, now. They're having conversations now. And they will respond to you. And we need them to respond to you. Like so people tell me about this history that happened in the 70s. It did not sound good for kids at all. So I know one thing, I'll talk afterwards. So I know one thing, this is a time for folks to come together. This is the time to tell our legislators what's going on. And once we have this meeting, or as we have these meetings, when they start to tell me or work with us to identify $1 million of cuts a month, we'll come back and report. We'll come back and report. And let me hand this back over to okay, so there's a district budget committee. So what we've been doing is we've been sharing the information in our board meetings, of course. The ESD is plugged in, the state is plugged in, but we also have this budget committee that we are going to bring things to this committee. And it may even end up that this committee becomes an advocacy group for the district, quite frankly. So this is the QR code. So if you're interested, please get involved. Please get involved. So listen, for the QR code. So listen. So let me talk. The question was about Zoom or only in person. We've been doing Zoom because it's just been convenient for people. Just so that folks, but if that doesn't work, we'll just change it. We'll just meet in person. I mean, that's not hard. So the thing is this, folks, we need your help. I know that, so on Thursday, the consultant comes. And he's a good person. He was actually commissioned by our education service district to help us find cuts. I still say, where are those cuts coming from? Because we've cut 132 FTE in the last 2 years. So, folks, if you have questions, please fill out those cards. Thank you for coming out, and I'm going to hang around. I'm not going to use the mic, but I'll just talk to folks as you all, if you have any more questions. Folks, have a good night. Sorry that this is so somber, but we wanted to give you the information. Have a fantastic night.
Yeah.